spoilers. If you complain about spoilers in the comments, you are actually blind and have no money.
Where'd you move here from, dumb?
I searched high and low to find the worst possible game in this category, and I believe I found it. It's called The Last of Us Part 2. Judging from the box, I don't even know what to think of it.
What kind of game is this? This is interesting.
Oh, just what this town needs. Another loudmouth dyke.
What?
Fuck did you just say? Ellie, don't.
Get the hell out of here.
Get your hands off.
This is not a game. This is like watching a movie.
And keep in mind, you're seeing the abridged version. I've been sitting here nearly 10 minutes so far.
What kind of fucked up game is this?
Joel, please get up!
The story, but I've never seen such a disgusting series of plot choices in my life.
This is one of the worst things I have ever seen in my life. On the box, it says plays like a game, but feels like a movie. Well, that's horse shit. It does not play like a game, and it certainly does not feel like a movie.
Game Award season is right around the corner, and you know what that means?
The Last of Us Part 2.
And I, like other people, have also been enjoying God of War Ragnarok. And while I do have yet to actually beat the game, and I'm sure I'll have my own problems once I do, so far, regardless, I'm having a lot of fun with the game. Which is exactly the problem, because not everyone is having fun! All jokes aside, quite a few people dislike the game for being too cinematic. In fact, when it comes to the idea of a cinematic video game, there's actually a somewhat adverse reaction from certain people.
Now PlayStation games are nothing but cinematic stories and voice acting, and it sucks ass.
Now, I get it. Not every game is for everyone. And frankly, it would be really stupid of me to complain about something like this. In the same vein of saying, let people enjoy things, it's only appropriate to say, let people not enjoy things. However, this does beg, in my opinion, a very good question. Are video games getting too cinematic? And is that a bad thing? In this modern era of video games, should games be cinematic? This cinematic genre is proving to be ever so popular, both critically and financially. However, is this the standard we want video games to be? And more importantly, are these even games anymore? So leave it to me, an armchair developer with no developing knowledge whatsoever, to answer this question very poorly, maybe. I don't know. But first question, what is cinematic? You see, a long time ago in the foreign year of 2010, some dead film critic named Roger made an article on why video games can never be art, and then proceeded to not define what art is. Thankfully, I'm not that guy, nor am I dead. But let's get something straight here. There is a difference between cinematic and narrative-driven. Yes, cinematic games are narrative-driven by nature, they kinda have to be, but on the other hand, you could make a narrative-driven game and not have it be cinematic at all. Both Night in the Woods and Disco Elysium are narrative-driven. I would not call them cinematic, though. When I talk about cinematic games, we're talking God of War, Plague's Tale, Last of Us, Uncharted. In other words, a cinematic video game is a game that is made to replicate cinema, and use cinematic techniques to tell its story. Yahtzee from Zero Punctuation calls these ghost train rides, mainly the linear ones. However, there are cinematic games that are also open world, like Marvel's Spider-Man and Red Dead Redemption 2. Basically, if your game is narrative-driven and presented like a movie, the chances are it's cinematic. I also don't really want to call Mass Effect or Life is Strange cinematic. They include a lot of the tropes, yes, but they're not really emulating movies to the extent that, like, David Cage is. While they are narrative-driven and do border on cinematic, I wouldn't quite call them full-on cinematic, at least not the cinematic that I'm talking about. But I could see why you would, and if you want to, go right ahead. It's not really important to make this distinction, honestly, but it's good for clarification, and hopefully makes the video longer so I can get more ad revenue. Here's the short and sweet of it. If it feels like a movie, but it's a video game, then it's cinematic. So what's the problem then? Well, there is a very vocal group of people who find these games harmful to the industry. Whether this group is a majority or a minority remains to be seen, and you all know my thoughts on minorities. As in, I love them. They're great. But they are vocal enough to be heard. Now, once again, I'm not trying to insult anybody's taste here, and you shouldn't force yourself to enjoy a type of game because Jeff Keighley gave it an award. However, as someone who does enjoy these types of games, I want to see if this really is too much. And furthermore, can we learn anything from these criticisms? And is there any value to cinematic games in general? Well, let's start here. What criticisms do people have against cinematic games? Well, here's one that I've heard floating around. Video games should be fun. I don't like this one too much. Look, I hate to just come out the door and just shit on people, but this is a bad argument to me. Like, there are games that I wouldn't call fun, but aren't cinematic either. Like, once again, Disco Elysium. I've been playing that game recently, and so far, it's absolutely phenomenal. I would not call it fun, though. Same for Papers, Please. That game is amazing, but it isn't fun. And in both cases, that's kind of the entire point. Also, fun means very different things to very different people. For some people, like me, an engaging story and long cutscenes are fun to me. So you're telling me I can watch an engrossing movie and play the action scenes? That sounds fucking awesome. The issue is that what fun is not defined at all. It's a really regressive and vague blanket statement. Like, are you implying that games can't be experimental? Or maybe experimental is fun? I don't know. This is a statement that harms more than just the games that are like movies. Like, if I said this in the context of any other medium, I would be laughed at. Yeah, sorry guys, I didn't like that Lighthouse movie. I think movies should be fun. Like, shut the fuck up. Go drink your prune juice, Grandma. Shut up, Grandma! Now, with all that out of the way, here's the real question. Are games too cinematic? Well, one point is that these cinematic games tend to undermine gameplay. People want to play a video game, not be forced to experience a story, which quite a few cinematic AAA games try and do. Distract the gameplay by having a movie instead. The issue, though, is that, they do have gameplay. The Last of Us, God of War, Uncharted. A lot of these games do have gameplay. Pretty in-depth gameplay, in fact. You can get pretty creative with the combat. You can upgrade yourself and your weapons. While gameplay will always, of course, vary case by case, I always find these games to have surprisingly in-depth mechanics. So that's it, right? There's no real problem here. The Last of Us, still a perfect game, right? Well, actually, I think there is a bigger problem going on here. That problem being inconsistent balancing. When you have a story in your video game and you have gameplay in your game, it's really important that no matter what your mechanics are, whatever you do in the game is highlighted by the context of the story. Basically, if you play your narrative cards right, or as we call it back at home, good writing, that will balance over into the gameplay, allowing this almost sort of transcendent narrative experience. If the David boss fight in The Last of Us were like any other big boss fight in any other game, it wouldn't carry the same emotional weight. But it's the fact you know these characters, what they've been through, who David is. And because the game takes time to actually build up context, you understand the emotional weight of all this, making the scene way more powerful.
It's me! It's me! It's me! Look! It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
For games like this is what you want to shoot for, that balance between gameplay and narrative. Meanwhile, a game like Quantum Break doesn't have a fucking balance. It has a long, terribly written TV show segment. A TV show that's affected by your choices in the game. But the story in the game is fucking boring, the story in the show is fucking boring, and therefore, while the gameplay is kinda fun, the story is so fucking boring that I end up just not caring. Meanwhile, on the other hand, a game like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture has a good story, but the gameplay is so slow and meandering that it also ends up being imbalanced in the opposite direction. However, here's the thing. The games that fail this balance are the ones that are bad in this genre. And I don't know about you, but I think it's unfair to judge an entire genre based on its bad examples. Like, Duke Nukem Forever is an FPS game that's dog shit. Doesn't mean that all FPS games are suddenly dog shit. Once again, for games like The Last of Us, God of War, Red Dead Redemption, etc., those games have a great balance of gameplay and story. You have a very robust gameplay system and a well-written story that gives context to the gameplay. Unless you're talking about fucking David Cage or something, saying that these games are just movies with button presses is a massive over-exaggeration. Something the gaming community totally isn't infamously known for. I've seen people call God of War and God of War Ragnarok walking simulators. Ah, yes, because Dear Esther has a fucking combat system in it. Do gamers just not like pacing? Is the idea of a slightly slower scene just extremely scary to them? Like, listen, man, I know boring. I watched Max Steel once. And you know, sometimes it's good to have slow scenes that just chill the game out. They add context to what you're doing. If gamers see stuff like this as bad to the industry, then I'm sorry, but I am just not at the same eye level as them. This, to me, is the right balance between gameplay and story. So that means games aren't too cinematic and will never be too cinematic. right?
Emotions.
David fucking Cage. A big reason why people don't like and or shit on cinematic games is probably because of this guy. Remember how I talked about balance like 5 seconds ago? How story can enhance gameplay? Well, David Cage wants to push gaming as an artistic medium, which I'm okay with. Gaming is an art medium after all. But David Cage's idea isn't to take influence from film and blend it with gaming, but instead his idea is to copy films verbatim and try to pass it off as some gaming version of art house, which there is a novelty to it, but the novelty can only last so long before you realize that a lot of your choices and or gameplay actions just don't matter that much.
You wait in the car.
Out of the question. I'm coming with you.
Listen, I'm tired of you talking back to me. You're a machine, so shut the fuck up and do what I say.
You're going to need me, Lieutenant. I know more about androids than you do.
Listen, I'm tired of you talking back to me. You're a machine, so shut the fuck up.
On top of the stories being very poorly written.
Mom would never put me to bed without Teddy. Why are you mean like that? It's not my fault that Jason is gone.
While both Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls are impressive on a technical level, they aren't impressive on anything else. Detroit Become Human will have these crazy action scenes that you're not actually playing through and they're just QuickTime events. And I'll go, man, I really wish this were like Uncharted where I was playing the game. And it gets even weirder when David Cage accidentally does find a balance. The Connor storyline in Detroit Become Human is genuinely really good. In this case, the gameplay comes down to interacting and trying to analyze Hank. He's a really complicated character and any little thing can ruin your relationship with him. You really have to think about your actions you make around him, what to say to him, etc. The interrogation scene in the game too, keeping this guy's stress meter relatively high while not too high. This is story-fueled gameplay.
28.
In short, you can do stuff like this. It's just that David Cage thinks it's smarter to not do stuff like this. This is where the hatred towards cinematic games comes from. Not so much that games are cinematic, but more so they're done poorly. And thus, by proxy, a lot of games that do tend to do it right get thrown into this kind of cinematic hatred bubble. The thing is, the only people making these movie games, these borderline gameplay-less choose-your-own-adventure movies, are David Cage and, like, Supermassive. And Quantic Dream, David Cage's studio, is fucking falling apart right now. Cinematic movie games have been experimented with for decades, and during the PS2 era, one of those people was David Cage.
Hi, my name is David Cage.
And during this time, it was a lot less refined. Fahrenheit forced you to play fucking Simon Says. But games like Metal Gear, Silent Hill, and Legacy of Kain had these high-concept stories with great themes and cinematic presentations, but they were still relatively unbalanced. I think now video games are finally finding that balance. You have some good gameplay mechanics and a good-ass story that elevates that gameplay experience. Because of this, I don't know how God of War or The Last of Us can be seen as quote-unquote too cinematic. To me, these are the right amount of cinematic. A nice mix, a nice trade-off between story and gameplay. These games have a very clear artistic vision and use the medium to their fullest.
Now, let's talk about your mental health.
In the end, are video games getting too cinematic? I mean, probably. I mean, we still get games like Elden Ring, games that aren't cinematic at all, and I think there will always be a market for cinematic games. In the same way, there will always be a market for non-cinematic games. I also feel like gamers don't ask the question of why are games cinematic? Is there a story function? Will the story enhance the gameplay? Once again, I can't say games are too cinematic because a lot of times, there are very nuanced gameplay systems in them. If every game were a David Cage type game, then yeah, they would probably be too cinematic. But I think where we're at now is a very good balance. So while games are becoming more cinematic, I wouldn't say they're too cinematic. A lot of these games have the right balance, and people that don't like that, I feel like lack the patience to truly appreciate them. Not to say you should force yourself to appreciate them. You should be allowed to not like these games. But god damn it, I like these games. I think these games do deserve the recognition they get, and don't quite deserve the scrutiny that a bunch of internet contrarians give them. But if there's one thing we can agree on, it's that David Cage should be kicked out of the industry.
Now, let's talk about your mental health.
Fuck you in the lanes you came with. Me and you ain't on the same shit. You ain't in my lane, bitch, nah. Throw that shit in fifth, rollie on my wrist. Ay, baby, you a star, I'm my only wish. I'm counting blue hundreds, I'm too money. Ay, and my little bitch, she too lovely. Yeah, hanging up and calling me right back. Ay, baby, why you calling me like that? Yeah, getting high with the seat laid back. Baby, gon' relax, yeah. Hey, they don't know the half, yeah. No matter what happened, I got your back. Baby, that's the facts, yeah. That's the facts, yeah. And we can fight, but the feeling's gone. I try to find the words, but they never come. I can still see you on the lawn, hey, laying outside in the summer sun. Yeah, we can fight, but the feeling's gone. I try to find the words, but they never come. I can still see you on the lawn, hey, laying outside in the summer sun. Hey, I'm with a dark-skinned girl on a Sunday, that's that Black Sabbath. She put them ones all down on a Hyundai, yeah, she had to have it. And she gone through, ready for the runway, shawty, you the baddest. Ay, baby, that's the facts, yeah, that's the facts, yeah.
That's what can happen if you don't have good reflexes.